Stephanie. Hey, girlfriend. How are
Hey,
you?
oh my God, Shaniqua, it's so good to see you. What has
Eh,
what's changed in your life lately?
Oh, Stephanie, everything. My hair, my headband, my mother-in-law is living with us. The cats are changing their routines. What's changed with you?
Oh my gosh. Okay, well you brought up hair first, so you know my hair's changed like four times at least
Of
since
course it
since we
has.
were last
It's
like
gotten darker. I like
just a
it. It's
little
gotten dark.
darker.
It
I'm
was
kind of
like a deep plum, I think.
it's gone through several shades, but right now I'm kind of trying to get back to my roots. But they keep changing on me, right?
So much has changed, like personally, with us and FITI.
What
How are you feeling about the changes with FITI?
I am really excited, and I think one, hello, audience, welcome back to season two of
Season two.
of our FITI Vodcast from illumination to innovation, and we have made some changes. But Shaniqua, why don't you tell our audience what kinds
Well,
of things we're changing this season?
after we recorded 24 episodes,
Oh my god.
season one, we put in a lot of work. I'm so proud of
I
us.
I did you know, like I saw an article that said that put us literally in the 1% of podcasts that are able to make it through a full year and publish more than 20 episodes.
We did
So
that.
we're in the top 1%, y'all.
And we did so much work. We've had like how many? I think maybe like three or four series in season one that we both like directed, produced. Also, we were the host of. Um,
I
and
think
I don't know
we're the
about
almost like the everything
we
of those,
were.
except for our fantastic guests, which were like brilliant minds all across the board.
Our guests are the gift that keeps on giving. I feel like that will never change. Like the guests just keep adding value
I
to
think
the
so. I
conversation.
think that's actually if we have like if we could stop change, I think that's where it'd stop right there.
They're the what is it, the constant, and we're the
Yes.
variable. But I think that like, well, with all of our success of last year, I don't know about you, but when winter came, I hit a wall and I thought something has to change. Not the podcast itself, but I was thinking like, what if we did something a little bit different? And honestly, I was inspired by your witchiness. I was thinking of like how does like the energy flow? And I went down a wormhole of why am I exhausted during winter? And I start to find that like that's like the natural flow of energy, the alignment with the seasons. So I propose that maybe we like kick things off when we're feeling energized with the spring equinox, and we structure our illuminating and innovative podcast in that similar rhythm, kind of like challenge the status quo of like how we work and how we create in this like type of sphere of like sharing ideas with others. So
It's one of my favorite things about why we work so well together is just being able, because the minute you described it to me, of course, you know me, I'm always immediately like Gen X resistant, like what?
excuse me.
But no, as soon as you like lay it all out, and I'm like, oh my god, that's brilliant. Oh yes, and then it's so in sync and aligned with just us energetically and the world. You know how we function. Because I started thinking about it like from even the audience. Where it was like, everybody comes back into January with like, already feeling behind, like already like so much to do. It's like, and I feel like it allows everybody to kind of get back into their rhythm.
Yeah,
And then we are like, I think rhythmically just adding ourselves into the mix, like just helping them vibrate higher, right? Like
right.
coming in at a time when they're going to be ready for what we have to say. And this season, I think we have a lot to say. I am really excited. Do you want to? Okay, so if
No,
I
you
don't
do
know if
it.
anybody's guessed or not because we've said the word, but do you want to tell everybody what we're talking about
Ugh.
this season?
All this season. we are talking about change, like the elements, the influence of change, the structures of change.
Absolutely. Totally inspired. Totally inspired by yourselves.
Yes, I feel like we've been allowing ourselves to really go through and the changes, and we've been so open and vulnerable with one another about the changes in our personal lives and our professional lives and just like us individually as people, like, so I feel
And
like this was only, oh, society, culture, right? This
like we
is like
can't stop
necessary.
the changes in the world, that is for sure. And there's a lot happening. And change brings up a lot of things for a lot of people. So it was, Shaniqua had the idea of really like, let's do a seasonal series focusing and really drilling down on one topic. And change for me, it's like one of my favorite topics. I'm like, hey, most people like really fear it. We'll talk about that. But like my motto in life is change brings change. And I was like, yes, what a great topic to talk about. Like,
Uh, I could see you like lighting up when change is coming.
like
Well, like, I mean, we talk about like, you know, change not being just like a siloed event. It like avalanches
it's
throughout,
ongoing is
right?
right. Like
It's mm,
that's why it's
well,
my motto. It's like the minute something changes, it automatically changes everything around you. It's even when we change ourselves, we change the way people relate to us. It's like we think we have to change other people, but reality, when we make those changes, other people have to adapt to what we're
that
changing.
is a message, and I received it. Ugh.
Well, let's talk about change. Like, I'm curious, what were you taught about change growing up? Or how do like, how do you think about change?
Well, so what I was taught, it wasn't necessarily change like per se. It was more of, I'm curious if you ever heard this, like this saying, um, be better than me. Like my mother,
Mm.
my grandparents, my father, like all wanted us to be better than they were. And it was that exact quote, be better than me, you know?
I love that
So
quote. That's as a parent, I feel that. As a parent, I
right,
receive that. I love
yeah. It was like so
that.
when I look back on it, it was like precious and like very sincere. It's from the heart.
It's like permission to change.
Hmm. But I will also say, like, I think subtly the change was rooted in like I guess defining as what I was born into or what I had wasn't enough. And that the be better than me was more on material. I know, like, I also think mindset as well, but
Hmm.
like I shared with you before, like I only speak AAB when I'm home, but
Hmm.
I wasn't it wasn't something that you grew up proud to speak because you have to be better than your generation so you can assimilate, so you can achieve the American dream, so to speak. So change is like a double-edged sword for me. What
Hmm.
about you?
I think it's interesting because it felt very much that way to me, but probably from a very different perspective. In that
How
change,
so?
well, I would say that change was not encouraged in my life. Like, I think there was more fear around change, a little bit of a don't rock the boat kind of a message. Like, and so I would maybe tie that message to privilege.
Hmm.
Don't lose what you have. Like you want to make sure that you align and fit in. And for me, and then and I don't think that message was like a clear message. I think it was presented to me in lots of different ways, through the way that, through the expectations that were set for me, through the way that we were disciplined, just through even the examples that were set for us, and But I think it's always interesting, like what we take from our messages,
Hmm.
like what we're able to, take with us and use, and what we leave, what we leave, like need to leave behind. And for
Right.
me, there was an aspect about change where, because I had like this really complicated medical background, and I was always in and out of surgeries, and there were always things that I had no control over at all that
Hmm.
were changing, that I had like, and I had to sort of learn to embrace chaos. Like like at a very, very early age, I just had to. I didn't always even have my parents right there with me. Sometimes I was just in a hospital with strangers. And so
Mm.
this is like an element of like change energy. Chaos is sort of the, and so when I say like the don't rock the boat, like structure and order was modeled in my house. Like everything was very ordered, very structured, very linear, and there was one path you could follow,
It's
and
almost like with your medical, like, I don't want to say condition, but with your the need to seek medical attention, you were like innately you were bringing forth like who you were. You were
I
challenging
was constant change.
the norm. Yeah,
I was
you came
constant
in
ambiguity, constant ambiguity.
ablaze.
Yes, from the beginning, from the
You're like a
beginning.
change advocate, a change evangelist.
I
Like,
mean, for certainly for parents who like really wanted everything to like work a certain way and be, and my parents were loving and they loved me,
yeah.
but it's like I know that just from like literally day one, I was creating like uncertainty, ambiguity, and it wasn't me, but it was my, what I was going through in my existence. But my
Hmm.
own experience with that was, I mean, to integrate it, to just, so it's at some point, part of why my hair might change, every 2 to 3 months, and like just because I love it. But it's like I don't run away from change in the same way. Like if I, for example, I've never had a job when I left a job,
Hmm.
right? I've
Oh,
just made that
yeah.
change, right? When it didn't feel right, because
Hmm.
I was able to develop. So it's like, I think with my parents, I accepted the existence of structure and order, and knew
Okay.
that there were ways that I needed to learn how to participate, no matter what I was doing. Even, in the way I do business today, I still have to have a certain structure and order to the business. I have to have a discipline about
Yeah.
it. But I embrace change, and I love and thrive on it. I always am like, wow, well, what comes next? And
That's
so,
so fascinating because I had like more like chaos in my structure, and I needed to create like the I had more chaos in my environment, and I created the structure so I could feel safe and have like a clear path forward. So that's pretty unique that we um
I
are
created
like
chaos.
the same sides. We're different sides of the coin. That's pretty fascinating. Well, so you mentioned like you navigate change by, it sounds like, just taking it head on, right?
I always start really with like intuitively, what am I feeling and what needs to happen? I mean, like for me personally, it's like I know if I'm avoiding something,
Okay.
even if I'm like doing all the things to pretend like I don't know it, right? Like I just don't get the luxury of not having that awareness. Honestly, like I like sometimes I'm like, oh,
100%. I get that. Like
could I
awareness
please?
is right there with you. It's
Like,
tethered.
it
Can't
is
avoid it.
tethered, as that's the truth. So I inherently and instinctively, I will know when change is even coming, like even before it's happening. And that could be like in big and small ways. It could be like
Hmm.
that could be a very personal thing. That could be a very like, oh wow, something is shifting, and I can have
Hmm.
that just energetic sense around that.
Hmm.
But I guess my first instinct with it is always curiosity before panic.
Hmm.
And so that helps, curiosity, like and trust me, I can totally go into the panic space, but I've done a lot of work in my life, right, to find that balance so that change in and of itself is something that I can really use as an exploration, or, a
Yeah.
way to learn more. It's like we learn from change. We learn a
Yeah.
lot from change, whether we want to or not sometimes.
Hmm. Well, for me, I so having structure, like creating my own structure, I was more of like the director of change in my life, like because I knew like I would set a goal, create a plan, execute, achieve the goal, and change is more of a byproduct because who you are when you set the goal isn't necessarily who you will be when you achieve the goal because there's like subquests along the way, right?
That's a great way of putting that. Yes.
So like change was more of a byproduct. And I changed, I evolved over time, but it was still so controlled. Like I knew what I needed to do. I did it well. And this was all like maybe this way of my life until like post pandemic. So majority of my life. And I will say since life as of now, I feel like I've graduated into like true adulthood where it is chaos, there's more complexity now that I'm with like a partner, we're building a life together. I'm in control of nothing, except for like myself. I just feel like I'm now surrendering to and just accepting the things that I cannot control, which is of itself change.
Hmm.
And I'm realizing that the surrender, the that isn't an innate or an extinct innate thing that well, it's not something I was taught. I'm the quintessential strong black woman,
Hmm.
resilient.
Hmm.
Surrender is not synonymous with resilient in
Surrender
my
was also not a part of my vocabulary
you
growing up
know
either. Yeah, there was definitely a hold your ground mentality, and it,
100%. That's why
yeah.
we see eye to eye. We get it. And so now it's just pure. I would say up until like maybe like a few months ago, really, I've just been like digging my heels in trying to find some sort of like I guess building blocks so I can start creating my frameworks again. And they're
Hmm.
just not there. That has changed. So I'm I'm looking to you for for tips and tricks on navigating chaotic change.
I've got two things immediately. On one, my little sign that's like right there. Okay, I'm like pointing
Okay.
at my little sign.
You
It
gotta like add that,
says,
like zoom in
I know,
when
I'll
we
have to, I
post.
will, I'll do a blow, I'll put it like, it says, live by what you trust, not by what you fear.
You're
And so that right
that's a
there
good one.
again goes back to intuition and instinct and trusting yourself, right? Like just live in that space, make choices
Yeah.
from trust, not from fear. A lot of
Mm,
times when we are avoiding or resisting change, we really do make choices out of that fear space of trying to keep things the same, and the change is gonna just keep happening. Like it's just like not gonna stop just because you don't want it to.
At this
Like,
point, I recognize it. It's like Groundhog's Day in my house. I feel like whenever we have our meetings, I'm like, and then you're like, Shaniqua, I've heard this before. I'm like, no, it's different, Stephanie. I swear.
it's all in evolution, right? It's like
Oh
I
my
like
gosh.
it's all in evolution. The other thing though, and this is real, it's like, and even when I'm working in business, I mean I apply this rule to my life as a whole, but I say it in business all the time, which is like getting people to slow down before change and
Uh-huh.
actually plan the change. Because so many times what happens is people will avoid problems, they'll avoid dealing with something, they'll push something off, they'll put it, procrastinate, all these things until it becomes a crisis. And then they're like, oh my God, we got to change it now. Oh my God, everything's got to change immediately. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You spent a good amount of time like letting this get all screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of my things is you can always change a plan, but you can never change chaos, because chaos as an energy just stays chaotic, right? So that what you can do, the best that you can do, is stop contributing to chaos, right? Is to
Mm-hmm.
just like stop adding to the chaos. You can, and so when you take that step back and go, okay, well, I am going to have a plan because there's value, like there's great value in, me just like bouncing from like moment to moment going, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. And there's also great value in having like a very specific, like, oh, this is the path I want to follow. But there's real value in having that path, but not being so attached to it that you can't make a change to it as you learn and grow and go, oh, I was on this path, but now I do want to go in this direction. And that's
Right.
okay. And that's not chaos. That's changing a plan
Mm-hmm.
versus, oh, I'm just like swirling around and looping and going. And that's chaos. And it does need structure. And so there is a middle ground where you can sort of navigate change and still embrace the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes, I'm just receiving all of these nuggets because I feel like, I mean, this is truly why I wanted to talk about change. There's change is happening, I think, to most of the people around me, including myself, like in the orbit, every time I turn on a TV, whether it's a fictional story or non-fictional newscast, like
Mm-hmm.
there's change everywhere. And um I've been feeling a lot of uncertainty and bits of anxiety. And for me, I think I shared this with you. One of the idioms growing up was tell the truth, shame the devil. And just like talking about it aloud
Mm-hmm.
releases the fear for me. Um,
Absolutely.
so
I
so
agree
yeah,
with
I
that.
mean that's
I,
that's what I've been thinking about.
I think that that is, I think we could take a quick break on that note
Mhm.
because that's something to ponder and come back and talk a little bit about the psychology of change and how that looks kind of for other people and why, and a little bit more about our series as a whole and what the audience can start getting really excited for.
Marvelous. All right. Well, Stephanie, let's let's define exactly what change is. If you don't mind, I like take us. I decided to look it up in the Oxford Dictionary.
Oh, I'm very
There,
curious what
there were
Oxford says.
two verb definitions and two noun definitions. I particularly found the verb definitions to be fascinating. So, the first, to make someone or something different, alter, modify.
Hmm.
The second, to replace something with something else, especially something of the same kind that is newer or better, substitute it one thing for another. And I find the latter more fascinating because it's essentially like it's defining whether it's like your uh, past or current state as being like not as good and the future state to be that of like
An
it's better.
improvement of some sort. Yes.
Hmm.
I also find and I guess I'm curious now. We just read the nouns really quick because I feel like there's a definition missing, and I'm like, really? Those were the verbs?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
even though those
Hmm.
were like both technically accurate in terms of what they were saying, they were also very weirdly analog. or
Right. Well, so I feel like so the noun it's the first noun, the act of or instance of making or becoming different.
okay, that's closer. That's interesting that that's a noun.
The second noun is um points
Coins. That's what I
or as
expected.
opposed to paper
Yes, I expected
currency.
coins to come up as a. So that first one is, and all right, now we're gonna just get into like grammar and language and my own
Mhm.
confusion with life. But it's like when you're calling, the act of doing something a noun, it feels sort of like you're calling a verb a noun. And because what I was
Mhm.
looking for was transformation, right?
Mhm.
And that sounds like that's the noun, right? Is
Yeah.
the act of transforming,
Well,
sort of.
technically that would be the verb because the
But
verb is
that's
the
see, that's
action.
that's what I mean. I feel like there's something missing here.
Yeah.
Like there's like
Well, so I feel like the like change without because change happens, right? And
yes,
to not define it as good or bad, I think it would make more like the first definition makes more sense, like to make someone or something different, alter, modify. And I feel
yes,
like that's like in its pure form, like what change, transformation
I agree
could
with
be.
that.
And
Yeah,
then when we start to label, in the second definition, that's where I think we kind of like, but it's also a thing, which is an object. So perhaps when we as people, life itself, it's
but you could
not,
you could definitely change. I mean, you could vandalize something and it would have been changed,
yeah.
right? Like, and so it seems weird. I agree with you in the context of the way that is written and
Uh-huh.
worded, um, yeah, that's very perplexing to me.
Change.
It doesn't feel accurate.
Change. That's it. The
I,
Oxford. You got to take it up with Oxford.
I'm disagreeing with Oxford.
Dear, you should write them a letter. Dear Oxford.
I, you
Oxford
know,
Dictionary.
I will say that I do use the Oxford comma. Okay, so hopefully they'll like appreciate my letter and take it seriously. But that, I mean, I think it is important to understand universal definitions of things, but then also how we define it and perceive it in our own
Uh-huh.
lives really affects our relationship to change, as
Right.
individuals, right? And so even if the Oxford can break it down into such tactical perspectives, I guess I think of change as being quite a bit more existential.
Uh-huh.
And I think that that's why there's both resistance and fear associated with change.
Do you feel like maybe transmutation would be more along the lines of what you're looking for uh, in regards to change?
I mean, you know, I think that actually fits into one of Oxford's definitions.
Because
I
I feel
think,
like that's more like encompassing. It's like changing like form, whether that's spiritual, mental,
yeah, I guess
physical.
at that level, yes, I think that makes sense. But I think that there's like this nebulous aspect of, I mean, like there's a proverb, you could never step into the same river twice, right? Like the idea that things are just change is a part of existence in and of
Hmm.
itself, right? That there literally isn't anything that's ever not changing. And,
Yeah.
we think of the structures around us, like, okay, so I'm sitting in a home and this is my house and it's got walls and doors and everything. But, I notice like the crack in the ceiling or, like
Uh-huh.
I mean, my home, even though it might be like super stable, it's still changing. We've seen
Hmm.
massive, like change with, weather taking out, entire populations and things like that where like again those people, those homes, that perspective of like, oh, I'm in the stable structured space, but then all
Hmm.
of a sudden a whole bunch of fires have now taken away everything that I perceived as stable and structured. Now
Right.
we have chaos, right? And like, so it's like that very big existential way that like change is just sort of out there happening,
I agree
but
with you. The definition doesn't
it doesn't
highlight
capture that.
yeah, it doesn't the nature of change and how it exists in reality. So yeah, I agree with you on that. It's very um academic without any, and I would say like not even academic, it's like
Yeah, it's
just
not academic
bland.
enough. I
It's
don't think it's
bland.
academic enough.
I
I'm
don't
like
think that they'd
really
like,
calling you out, Oxford. Okay, I'm
maybe
just
they didn't like the change, maybe they're not fans of that real.
well, it's
Um
an opportunity. Look, that's all I can say. Change is always an opportunity for change, and so like,
Well, let's talk about like the psychology of change and like how change happens. Um, I know before we came back from the break, you were excited. Well, during our break, you were excited to share um, what you've learned about the psychology of change from like the research and your own experience.
yeah. Well, again, it's like most people, I think, approach change with a certain amount of anxiety. I mean, some people actually fear change, but I think that in general, like if for example, if you think about people at work and when you know that there's change happening, but you don't necessarily know what those changes are, that ambiguity like can really create a lot of tension, right? In the culture and in the environment. And so I think most people sort of like have that negative perception of change, which is really interesting. It kind of goes against the Oxford. It's like, no, Oxford says it's
Yeah.
going to be better.
You're just altering or modifying.
You're just
Chill out.
exactly.
No need to
But
fear.
that's
It's
not the
black and white.
reality. Most people are really like, they get anxious and they want to resist change. They're like, well, no, wait a minute. I know how this works and I know what the outcomes are right here. And
Uh-huh.
like, even if those outcomes are crappy and bad, like at least they're known, right? Like we know what to expect and that's okay. But now you want me to change? What if it gets worse? Like that's, almost always the first thing. Like what if something happens that's outside of my control? What if we're not even thinking about all the possible things that could occur
Sure.
if we change, and it's like,
Yeah.
there's all this stuff that I think comes up for people. And so people resist change based on fear, but they also base it on lack of trust. Like if they don't trust the situation or if they don't trust themselves, they're going to be more
Um,
resistant to change. They resist it because they fear what they're going to lose out on. Like, just sort of like I was raised in that space of like, you don't want to lose what you already have,
mhm.
right? So you don't want to make a change because you might lose something that you've already got.
What
And
do you think about like time? Because as you were sharing like the fear, the resistance, I recall learning like a new like requisition um opening tool that we were using at one of the companies I worked for in the
mm-hmm,
past. And I recall just not wanting to move, like to work with this tool because I just didn't have the time. Like my my time was perfectly mapped to the process that we initially had,
mm-hmm.
and they weren't like allowing me, they didn't take like my workload wasn't um a leave so I could spend time learning this new tool. So I was quite resistant to make that transition.
I think that's interesting, especially bringing up like that type, because we talk about change management, right, in business,
Mhm.
right, and we in business, you get ready to make that change, you get ready to like stop the chaos or do whatever. And ideally, from a change management perspective, you've studied the problem, you have a value proposition, you have a solution, you understand like what the ROI is going to be, all of these things. And a big piece of change management is connecting the people who actually have to implement the change and who are going to be affected by it the most to the purpose and value of what that change is for. And if
Mhm.
that doesn't happen, you have like failed in your process
Yeah.
of change, right? Like the change management piece of it has not been successful. It doesn't really matter,
Mhm.
even if everything gets implemented, if you don't get the buy-in. And that buy-in should happen very early on in the process. And typically what happens is all of that examining and researching and meeting with like because here's the people like new stuff, right? We talked about like change,
Yeah.
that improvement, right? So there's somebody out there that like wants the great new system. There's somebody out there that
Right.
wants the shiny new thing, right? But in business, especially, implementing that requires process change. It requires, collaboration change. Sometimes different people are
Time.
involved, and then the time comes in. And again, if you're not connected to the value of how does that improve your world specifically, then the buy-in just isn't going to happen, and you're never going to get the productivity that you want from it.
Right.
It's
And I would even go on to say like when you like I was connected to it because I was connected to the value proposition. It made sense, but I did not have actual time to
it,
implement it into my workflow. Because it's change management in the business. I feel like business world is this big initiative, but then it really comes down to the individual doing the work. And
well, did it
you know,
solve problem? Because again, like when you talk about not having time, it's like what I'm doing right now serves the purpose. It goes back to that
hmm
kind of point. It's like, what do I lose or gain if I make this change?
hmm
Right? Because if I'm going to lose more time and it's not going to like give me a gain, I'm going to resist the change. I'm just
right.
simply going to keep doing the easiest thing that gets the thing done.
And I will say, I think that like companies, and I think this is maybe challenging how we work in a
Mm-hmm.
sense of when change management is being rolled out. Maybe our change management listeners would agree. I'm curious what they would think, but like,
Please tell
it's
us.
really, it's really difficult to do your actual job, your responsibilities, and then add in change because your 8 to 10 to 12 hours that you're working, your workload isn't reduced because change is introduced. Like, how can we as business leaders and change management, consultants, like help the individuals like actually roll
I
into the
mean,
change. So
the
this is
the
off
the
topic, but
real the real answer is one that nobody likes to hear, and that's that change costs time and money, and it deserves it.
Mhm.
And instead of like doubling the workload of somebody who's already probably overworked and undervalued in their space that they're in, just because that's the way corporate is always trying to take as much as it
Right.
can from the worker, right? But realistically, they overlook the fact that when they burn out their employees, when they don't value them properly, when they it creates a lot of unnecessary change. People leave, people quit their jobs, they start quiet quitting, they start becoming less productive. Like all these changes are still happening even when they don't want to like take the time to implement change properly, right?
That's
Like because if they're
fascinating.
implementing it properly, you shouldn't be feeling the stress of that change. That's the
Yeah.
whole point, is that really realistically in the world where it can be and should be controlled, right? Like change in your personal life, we talk about change management. Can you do change management in your personal life? Right.
Maybe,
Or
maybe not.
maybe, I mean, sometimes
Maybe.
yes, you can make really
Yeah.
conscious choices about change and make it, but sometimes things just happen
Right.
on a personal level and you just have to respond to that change.
Mhm.
Somebody you care about might pass away. You might have to change some critical aspect of your life because of something that happens to your own physicality. There are changes that come up for us that, we're change managing after the fact. But
Mhm.
in business, oftentimes, if they're, especially if you're doing business well, you're managing change ahead of the problem as opposed
So
to reacting to the problem.
mhm.
That
So
goes
you're
back.
saying no matter what, you're gonna have a cost for change, and if you are more proactive about it, then you can carve out time to allow your employees or team to get up to speed. If not, then change
Change
is
is always happening. There's a cost for changing with change and there's a cost for resisting change,
Mhm.
right? And most people look at the cost of changing with change and don't want to look at the cost of resisting change.
Mhm.
And that is, this cost always costs more.
Right.
Resisting it almost, and there's a difference between sort of sustaining and maintaining. Like,
Mhm.
this is like, there are things that can be more stable, more structured. Not everything has to be changing at the same rate of speed.
Mhm.
But when change has to be implemented and it's a very conscious thing, again, we go back to most of the time, businesses will wait until there's a crisis instead of iterating and refining as they go, making
Mhm.
subtle small changes. They want to make big changes all at once, and then they don't want that to to impact the flow of business, right? So
Mm.
again, instead of slowing it down to make the change, they dump that change
Mm.
and create a harder change process. That's an opinion. Okay, that's
Yeah.
an opinion. It's
Well,
something
well,
I've seen happen.
I will say, so I researched like how change could happen in like companies and society and in individual people.
Hmm.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on all three. So I'll start with business since we were talking about business.
Yeah.
So the change in business, there's four steps. There's the planning, which
Hmm.
is vital to like help deliver the change. There's the vision, connecting the
Hmm.
change with an idea, an ideology. There's data. I'm sorry, I can't count like that.
You're doing good.
there,
We're
there,
following. We're on three.
there-
Three.
there's
Data is three,
data.
y'all.
Data is a third. In order to like support the plans, right? Because you have the
Yep.
idea. Now you need to have like the data to back it, and then the last is flexibility, being flexible with your plans because it's not linear, right?
Yep.
So, what do you think about those four change steps in business?
I think that if more businesses accepted that that fourth step was really critical, it's actually step two and four that I think get. I think businesses really focus on planning and data. They don't always focus enough on connecting people into the vision.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, for various reasons, they withhold that vision. And they may think it's strategic or not, but and then I think, on that flexibility piece, they get too locked into the outcome that they're looking for. And
Mhm.
so it doesn't allow for necessary flexibility. Again,
Mm.
maybe the need to slow down, maybe the need to
Yeah.
like shift direction slightly. I often say sometimes we work we're working so fast, we get halfway done and we realize we're solving the wrong problem. Because we're
Yes.
just not taking enough time to iterate and understand what the actual real problem is. And so we're
Right.
just changing. Everything is always, even when you're not changing, change brings change. Not change is still change. Okay. It's like,
Mhm.
just because you know what Rush says, the decision not to decide is still a choice, right?
It
Like,
really
it's like,
is.
just because you're not making a choice doesn't mean that you're not making a choice.
Right. I agree with you on that, and I think a lot of change is like spearheaded by data versus a true actual plan and a vision. It's
Hmm.
like, well, the data says, and now we're just like marching in a direction because of the data, and it's like, but does this even align with our core values?
It's really interesting because the way that those four steps align, it goes from sort of doing to being to doing to being, and
Hmm.
these are important aspects of just how we flow as humans,
Mm.
right? We need that being time so that we can process the doing.
Hmm.
If we're just doing, we're wasting like lots of time and energy, and we're not going to get the result back on it.
Well, let's change gears and
Yeah.
talk about change in society. So there was two points in change in society. The first was social movements inspired by political, economic, like I guess
We don't have any of
ideological
that going on right
movements,
now. Like, there's
right?
literally none of that happening.
None, none. So boring today. And then the second I found quite interesting, but it makes so much sense. Interactions,
Hmm.
interacting with other people that
Yeah.
sparks change in society. So when you're this reminds me of like when I'm like having conversations with like my friends that like are in more homogenous communities, like, oh, like I didn't see it that way as I'm telling them stories about like, you know, hanging out with diverse groups and
Hmm.
what I'm learning, what I'm exploring, what I'm eating, it's like, oh, I would have never thought about it in that way, So interactions is very important. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I well, it's interesting because I had looked up fear of change and was came across the actual word for phobia, for the phobia of
Hmm.
change, which I have to read it. Metathesiophobia.
Metathesiophobia.
Metathesiophobia. And some of the symptoms of being like phobic level afraid of change is isolation, avoiding social situations, anxiety around interactions with people, getting angry because people want to talk about changing things that are changing in society, literally,
Hmm.
and it creates an actual phobic response. And I looked at that because I think, it's like, it's kind of like we say, people fear change and that's kind of a thing. But it's like right now, I think there's a lot of people that really do fear change, like
Hmm.
in ways that are not healthy for them or society, right?
Hmm.
Because it's happening. And so I think it's interesting bringing it up on that social level of interaction, because I don't think we interact with each other as much as we used to, and I
Hmm.
don't think it's been good for us on a social level. Like, even within family systems, I see like more fragmentation, people more, like when I was a kid, we went to family reunions every single year, and they were all these people that I only saw like at that summer reunion, but it was like 60 people, and
Yeah.
I'm like trying to remember when's the last time we had more than like 12 family members together, or 8.
Right.
I mean, like, honestly, I wouldn't even know where to start, right? To
Hmm.
bring together 60 blood related people in my life, right? Like, those interactions don't exist. And that's just like in my family on that familial level, but I see that replicated in so many different ways in
I will
community.
bring you and anyone else home with me to Florida. I go home quarterly, and I think my mom's siblings and their kids, it's like 40 of us. I will bring you home with me.
Please, I
They're
crave
loud.
that. Like, I
Yeah.
totally crave that.
You'll enjoy it. It's like the loving dysfunction that everyone longs for it. It's like
That's
we're all a little weird.
that's
It's a lot of love.
I did grow up wanting to be like, one of like six kids. Like, and almost all of my friends have multi siblings, including my husband who has four. Like I have a brother, and we love each
Uh-huh.
other dearly. We have a really close relationship, but he lives in a totally like several states away, and I live in the middle of Texas, which means I'm already like several states away from several states. Like
In
it just
Texas.
yeah, in Texas. Like,
I believe in Texas they call them counties. Uh,
they cl-
they're they're massive. Yeah, you're like 8 hours to the next border. Fantastic. Um, you want to hear the changes in people? Because
I
I think
do.
you'll find this interesting. So there's this. I saw this article. I believe it was Psychology Today. We'll link it, but I have to read it because I didn't memorize it. But when I was reading it, it sounded like what I did naturally when I share with anyone and they ask about my workout, like, oh, do you, when I'm off season, like, are you working out? I'm like, no, I'm working out mentally. They're like, what? But I always start with like a mental, like whatever I'm setting up to do, I start mentally and then I move forward with the do
Hmm.
and all that. So, without further ado, the 5 stages. The first stage is pre contemplation. So, this is like when someone is like, they're not aware of the problem or an issue.
Hmm.
They're existing and there's no plan to change.
It's the intuition. It's like something you don't even know yet.
Not even yet. It's not on your radar.
It's in
The
it's in your
second
subconscious mind.
The second stage is contemplation. And so this is when the person becomes aware. They haven't necessarily committed to the change. And researchers noted that people at this stage are more ambivalent. I'm sorry. They know they need to change, but they're not ready to actually change.
Hmm.
So,
Yes, I think a
self,
lot of
they're
people get
aware.
stuck in that state.
Hmm.
That's just a guess.
Yeah. Oh, well, they do because, like, you may not know how to do it. That's
Hmm.
what usually people say, but I think it's just like for me, I go like you're not taking action. I don't know how
There's
to do things,
certain
but you just got to
actions
do
you
it.
may or yeah there's certain actions you may or may not want to take.
Uh-huh.
Knowledge is one thing, but we have so much knowledge available to us. It's not hard to know how to do something
Yeah,
these days.
Google it.
Right, exactly. Ask AI. Um,
I'm like Kim Kardashian, just go to work.
AI will like develop a full change plan for you. Like it'll just like
Right.
put it all
It will tell you what you need to do. The third stage is the action, right? It's the I'm sorry. The third stage is the preparation. So you're
together.
committed to the change. You intend to take action within the next month. So not only are you self-aware, you're like, I am I'm going to like not I haven't had a drink and I'm not going to buy a drink from here on out, right? Like
You start making a
so
plan to how that change is going to look in real life. Like,
exactly.
yes, that makes
The
sense.
fourth is action. So there's a strong commitment to the intentionality of change. You're
Hmm.
self-directed. This stage lasts about 6 months because after like this time you're starting to create more of a behavioral
Hmm.
as it becomes part of like who you are.
Hmm.
And so to help when I'm like navigating change, I like to change my statements about myself. Like I'll say something like, I am a person who does not drink.
Hmm.
I do not drink. So instead of saying like if someone asks me, do you want an alcoholic beverage? I just I personally don't drink. I'll say something along those lines. So it now becomes a part of who I am.
Hmm.
And then the fifth stage is maintenance. So this sustains the behavior change indefinitely, and it's fully integrated into your behavior change of your life. So the goal isn't to get to maintenance. And the researchers, I forgot their name, I think is Prochaska and De Clemente. We'll link them so they can get their credit on this research. They were
Definitely.
researching cigarette smokers. So this is actually quite fascinating.
Hmm.
But they made a point to say that like change isn't linear, it's spiral. So instead of being like beating oneself up about um, getting like stuck or relapsing,
Hmm.
just take it out on chin. Maybe you need to stay there a little bit longer. until you feel more committed to it.
I'm
But as you called out, people typically say get stuck in contemplation and they get stuck in the action stage.
I believe that for sure, because if you can get through the planning stage, I mean, yeah, you would take action. Like if you can get to that part of planning, you're probably going to take that action. I'm curious, did you smoke cigarettes in your life? Have you ever
I
smoked?
have smoked a cigarette, yeah.
But have you had a cigarette addiction? Have you given up cigarettes specifically? Because
No, I
I'm
haven't.
curious. It's like I had a cigarette addiction. I started smoking cigarettes around the age of 12,
Uh-huh.
and I had a pretty strong addictive pattern until I was about 25 or 26.
Mm.
And I had to take pulmonary lung tests, and I was required to change my addiction pattern. And to the degree that my doctor brought my husband into his office alone and said, "Are you prepared to be a single father? Because if she doesn't
No.
quit smoking, she will die, like in like 2 to 3 years. Her lungs will not support smoking like that." And so I had to quit smoking whether I wanted to or not. I guess I could have kept
Hmm.
smoking, but I, had a 5 year old and I was in love with my husband and
Yeah.
wanted to
You
live my
want to
life.
live.
Wanted to live my life, right?
Good
So,
choice you made.
and I worked at the time in an environment where smoking wasn't just a thing. I worked in technology and I was in sales and I worked with the engineers, and all the engineers smoked. And all the like really important strategic client conversations happened out at the smoking table with the engineers. So if I didn't,
Oh, come on.
if I didn't go out there with them while they're smoking, and I was a top sales rep, it was important. It was something that mattered to me, right? And if I didn't go out there while they were smoking, I'm pulling myself out of this opportunity. So I had to
Uh,
make some really conscious choices about, one, quitting the addiction of nicotine is difficult. That's interesting. It makes sense that they would study that because it's
mhm.
common enough. It's very challenging to quit. Um, the first year that I quit, I kept a cigarette, an unlit cigarette behind my ear for the whole year, the same cigarette. I kept it with me. And I'd sit there sometimes and hold it in my hand while I was talking. Um, After that year, and I threw it away, so I'd still go out and like hang out with the engineers, but I'd hold my cigarette. I'd sit a little bit upwind or away, like
Mhm.
out downwind, I guess, away from the smoke. But I didn't, I had to make these choices about what I could handle and sustain and maintain. It took me a full year to quit. I did not quit cold turkey,
Mhm.
but pretty close, pretty close. But I cut, I smoked a little bit. And then every year for 5 years, I would have a cigarette on a particular day. When every 5 years, I would have a cigarette until I remember that it was like that. It would have been the next 5 years, and I was like, the last one really sucked. Like I remembered it for 5 whole years. That the last one I smoked 5 years ago was like it was a horrible experience, and I didn't
Well,
enjoy it. And
did it
it's just
taste
like
different? Like what?
it tasted like poison because that's what it was. And it's
Mm.
like, and I just, it's like one of those things. That's how it was not a linear process. My husband eventually quit too, but he didn't quit when I quit. He
Uh-huh.
had to go through his own, process. So those types of changes, I think, when you were describing the steps, I was thinking about like when you said a New Year's resolution, because you talked about the preconception, and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh yeah, that's like in October before Halloween, right? Like
Right.
you haven't started going like, oh wait, it's about to be here, but you're still you're just still figuring out what you're going to be wearing for Halloween. But
Mhm.
then you get into like November and you're like, oh crap, I'm gonna have to like set a resolution, right? Like this is like the
Mm.
mindset. And then you get to the point you're like, resolution setting time. Okay, what's my plan? Am I gonna be working out more? Am I gonna quit drinking?
Right.
And then you get to that like first stage where you have to take an action and be like at the party and go, no, I'll have something else.
Mhm.
Or, and then you have to do that, like 60 times in a row
Yeah. I
to
mean,
integrate it. And then, yeah.
I understand exactly, I would say the same but different. Like I recognize that I would have a cocktail, maybe two, and I would have a hangover as if I binge drink like a 19-year-old college student and someone buying a plastic bottle of vodka. Like it felt horrible. And I would allow this to happen every weekend, like after work, you go for a Friday happy hour. And then on Saturday or Sunday, you're going to brunch with your girlfriends. And I just recognize I am hurting myself. Why am I doing this over and over again? Now I'm out. I feel like crap on Monday. And so I think I enjoy similar fashion, like, there's like fun happening, there's more, it, drinking is so intertwined into social life as an
Hmm.
adult, especially an adult without kids.
Hmm.
All I feel like all you're doing is drinking, and I had to make a change just so I could actually experience life and no longer be down.
It goes back kind of to what you were talking about earlier with interaction in
Hmm.
general. And what's interesting is, we were talking about how fear of pain, fear of loss, fear of these things can cause you to be resistant. But right now, we are talking about how being tired of pain, not
Hmm.
wanting loss, not wanting, like, can also motivate change, right? Like, because that's literally, the opposite side of that coin is, oh wow, I don't want to die. I might want to change this habit, right? Like I
I
don't,
want to
like
live.
I want to live. I don't want to feel like shit every Saturday. I'm sorry, every Saturday morning. So I'm going to change this habit because I'm seeing it over and over. I can't deny it. I'm no longer in preconception phase. I am
Uh-huh.
aware. I see it over and over again. So now, if I am choosing, I'm making a choice. I'm making a conscious
Right.
choice to say, oh, I know I want to feel bad every Saturday. I'm going to make that conscious choice to feel bad every Saturday. And it's
Exactly.
so it does become one of those things where you do. Are you going to hold yourself accountable to change, to your own change, right?
Right.
Like, and some people do get stuck in the it feels better to feel bad phase.
Uh-huh.
It's like the devil, like the bad that I know, feel like, and a lot of times that, and this gets into like my whole world of why people don't change. They're avoiding emotions, right? You're
Uh-huh.
already like masking emotions with whatever it is you're doing with the alcohol, with the cigarette, with the
Mm.
whatever. And when you release that mask, you release that tool, that
Uh-huh.
resource that's available to you. It may not be the healthiest resource, but it's served you.
Uh-huh.
And it's why people have such a difficult time making those choices of like, well, what's going to serve me if I don't have this?
Mm.
And it's learning how to serve yourself, right? Learning how to take care of your own needs and process those emotions even when they're uncomfortable, because it feels uncomfortable on Saturday mornings anyway. Like you're already uncomfortable.
And uncomfortability is looking at me already.
It's already
Um,
there.
yeah. Well, on that very insightful note, let's take a quick break and we'll come back on discussing how we can embrace change. We'll make that a quick segment because we have been going on. We are in love with change, okay? Or
Oh my
at
God.
least inspiring ourselves and others to change. So we'll be right back.
All right, y'all. We are back and we are here to not stop the change.
Keep it moving.
Going on, change brings change. Um, but we do want to like bring this back around to why we're here talking about change. And Shaniqua, I know that you wanted to close out our last segment conversation with a few
Mhm.
questions. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's do it. So, Stephanie, like at this point, we talked about change and how it happens, defining change for our audience and business and culture, in society and individually. Should we fear change? What's your takeaway?
I want to know your takeaway first.
Okay, let me think. Well, okay, should. Like now, looking at semantics, should we? I would say no. Could we fear change? Very much so. But I don't think we should fear change. It's something that occurs naturally. Not only in our individual lives, but in nature. It happens in business. It happens in society. Um, I'm thinking about like one big change. I was listening to the History Tea podcast. Um, and they brought up the change in England from going from the Catholic Church to the Protestant Church because Henry VIII wanted to divorce Catherine, and he wanted a son. That brought upon change, and I could imagine maybe we would have been Catholic. I don't know. So I found that change to be quite interesting. I shared that with my mom, so she knew who to think for a Protestant
It's
Jesus.
like, it's promising. It's awesome.
But what do you think about change? Should we
Yeah,
fear change?
I would say no as well. We should learn to flow with change. We should understand like what change is within our control, what changes we have responsibility and accountability for, and then understand the changes that are literally, I mean, I'm like super happy, especially living in Central Texas, every time there's anything that even feels remotely like a seasonal change. Okay, like
I think we're in spring right now because it's cool at night and in the morning.
you know,
The birds are
you
chirping.
we've been having spring since December. Okay, like off and on, it just comes and goes. But this is like there are changes that we naturally embrace that are naturally a part of the flow of our lives. And I think the more that just like for example, what we started with this podcast, we took this break, this respite during a period when naturally in winter, it's our winter season here, that we're coming out of into the spring. And so during that winter season, you naturally go inward. You naturally, kind of withdraw and reevaluate and plan and do these. And that's sort of a natural energy that's happening. Right. So to not, it's like, is it better to flow with that or go against that? It's
Right.
like, and my opinion would be it's better to flow with those changes, like to let them into your life. Doesn't mean that you stop doing everything that you're doing.
Hmm.
It's just like allowing just things to ebb and flow in ways that fulfill us instead of just constantly draining us. If we're in this state where we feel like we are constantly avoiding something or constantly having to do something, it's not sustainable. That flow is really what is sustainable.
I could not agree more. I mean, so it seems like the way that you described it, what we've researched, it seems like change is necessary. Like I think that's if you're not changing, maybe we should check your pulse. Uh,
I think that's
like
a real statement.
are you okay? You haven't changed.
Yeah, literally.
um, well, what I loved about like the earlier part of our show, you shared how you've just took on the chaos of change. Maybe you could share with me and our audience like how to enjoy change.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that one word that I used, which was curiosity. Like instead of allowing it to turn into a panic or an anxiety, just be curious first. Like, what does this change have to offer for me? What can I learn from this change? Why am I avoiding it? Why do I feel afraid of this change? And like these curiosity questions can make it a lot easier, one, to be in touch with your own intuition, to develop that trust that you need to really embrace change. And then also, I mean, I like to look at anyway, like I like to be excited. I like to experiment. I like to have fun. I like to do like and certainly change can bring a lot of chaos that we don't want. But I lost my home to a flood. That was a big change, right? And it
Mm.
happened overnight, all in one fell swoop, right? And then the next day, everything has changed.
I love how
And
like there's some things in life that like most things like success doesn't happen overnight, but tragedy certainly
tragedy
can.
happens. Tragedy usually does happen like very quickly, right? But then you're left with like my home went away that night, but I had not adapted. I had not grieved. I had not yet changed.
Mm,
Right.
mm.
I had to catch up to this change. And this is, people experience this all the time. It's like change does not happen overnight. It is an evolutionary process, which is why that one definition where it talks about is a spiral, it's really actually a beautiful way to think about it. Because like if we think about tragic change that we don't want, that we're not asking for, anticipating, or prepared for even. and then it is upon us, and we have to react or respond to that change.
Yeah.
Right. And the more that we can, one, be okay with change, even when it's painful, even when it's, but we all understand that like death is a part of life, right? But how many people get caught up in fear of mortality, right? And it
Mhm.
prevents them from making choices or experiencing their life in a certain way.
Yeah.
And that fear of change where you just stay at a job for like way too long, even though it's burned you out, you're not getting anything from it. You're not, and it's like I talk to so many people who hold on to again that pain that they know for fear that there isn't a better, right? That
Yeah.
the change won't bring the upgrade, right? Because that's
Mhm.
an expectation. So yeah, I think that
Ah,
we embrace it by being curious, because if you're not even curious about what could happen, like what could happen if I left this crappy job that's burning me out and causing me to go home late at night, not see my kids and not talk to my spouse and whatever I'm existing in, or making me, drink or eat in ways I know aren't healthy for me, and giving me
right.
life patterns that I'm basically avoiding this change. And then
Yeah.
what is that costing you? What does it cost to get a divorce? What does it cost to have your health go decline? Like, what does it cost to not have strong relationships with your family member? Like, all of these things have a cost,
Mhm.
right? But we get locked into the costs we know. I know what I'm
Right.
paying for this. I think I know. And
Right.
usually we're not really curious enough to explore the full perspective. We become very defensively myopic. It's like,
Stephanie, I am so grateful that not only are we podcast partners, but we're friends, and I get your wisdom. Um,
wisdom and
you're
reflection. This is our whole relationship back and forth with each
uh,
other. Is like we're constantly learning and teaching from each other, and it's amazing. Like,
I remember we met Samara Dar. She has her mortgage company. We met. That's where at the networking event we met at.
yes,
I remember she shared with me that a successful relationship requires um, both individuals both individuals need to be able to be the student and the teacher.
I
If
agree. And
one
I
is
think
always a teacher
that's
and the
brilliant
other is always a
insight.
student, it won't work.
I think that's really
Yeah.
brilliant insight. All my
Um,
best relationships are like that. That is a true story, Samara. Absolutely.
Shout out
Shout
to
out.
Samara if you're
Shout
looking
out
for
to
a
Samara.
home. Hit her up. um, but my I wrote this down. The quote that you said earlier: "Make choices from trust, not fear." And I think that's what we should leave with our audience when it comes to change. In the words of Stephanie Crane, aka the corporate mystic, make choices from trust, not fear. Stephanie, what can we expect in the upcoming episodes of season two with Biddy?
Well, our audience can trust that if they are experiencing change, big or small, personal or professional, that we are going to have a place for them to come and learn more about what they can do, what kinds of change is happening out there. We're really going to dive into this topic in this season. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. I mean, and I think I'm really thrilled about like the season title, the
Oh yeah, we
architecture
haven't even
of
said it.
change. The
Tell them.
architecture of change. Um, the architecture of change. We're discussing how our world is shaped through society, culture, and business. And we're examining the key elements of change, clearly, from our thorough conversation today. Why
Absolutely.
change happens, how we adapt, and what it takes to actually move forward.
Absolutely. I think we just need everybody to join us. I think we're going to be publishing every Thursday,
Mhm.
and there'll be like little snippets along the way. So we're really excited about the season. I'm spinning. I can see myself spinning. I start doing that.
My knee is bending. I'm spinning. I'm standing up and allowing myself to move.
Like, I am excited about this season. I am excited to dive into change. I want everybody to be as excited about change as I am.
I think they are. I think we all are about change, right? Because it's I feel like we're all on the per, uh, precipice. There we go. We're all on the precipice of like transformation, and I think some of us, like myself, may be screaming to the tops of their lungs, like, "Why? Give me my structures!" And there's some that's just like flowing. It's a lot of us somewhere in between. But I think that think that we're ready for a change. You won't want to miss season 2. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening on your favorite platform, tap that subscribe button, y'all.
Do it. Subscribe. And we will see you for the next show.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to our show. Show us your support by following us on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
You can also find us on Castos at fromilluminationtoinnovation.castos.com. If you love our show, share it with your friends and coworkers too. Let's all work together to help businesses
Vibrate higher.